Street kid stops millionaire from driving. Don't drive, your wife cut the car's brakes, sir. What happens next will surprise you. Night was falling over New York and the sky seemed about to collapse. Lightning cut through the dark clouds, like silver blades, while the deafening sound of thunder echoed through the city's wet streets. The cold wind whipped the faces of the few pedestrians who still insisted on walking under the storm. Among them, a thin black boy with shabby clothes and alert eyes ran barefoot along the flooded sidewalk. Gale was only 12 years old, but he carried on his shoulders a maturity that many adults would never achieve. For as long as he could remember, the streets had been his home. He had learned to see beauty in the little things, a coin lost between the cobblestones, a piece of bread forgotten on a bar table, or even the shine of puddles reflecting the distant lights of the city. But tonight the storm seemed different, fiercer, more relentless. "I can't stay out here," he muttered to himself, his teeth chattering from the cold as he tried to take shelter under a narrow awning. The rain was relentless, and he knew he needed to find shelter quickly. It was then that his eyes caught sight of something in the distance, a luxury garage with automatic doors partially open. Gale hesitated for a moment. It was risky to enter private property, especially in such an elegant neighborhood as this one. But necessity spoke louder. With quick, cautious steps, he approached, slipping through the crack in the door before. It closed automatically. The interior of the garage was imposing. A gleaming car occupied the center of the space, its aerodynamic lines shining even in the dim light of the room. There were tools organized on shelves, decorative paintings on the walls, and even a subtle smell of new leather in the air. To Gale, it was almost a palace. He huddled in a corner, wrapping himself in a piece of old blanket that he always carried with him. His breathing began to calm, but something was bothering him. Voices coming from inside the house. "Who's there?" he asked himself in a whisper, his eyes fixed on the door that connected the garage to the house. Gale held his breath as he heard the voices coming from the adjacent room. He was crouched near the door that connected the garage to the house, trying not to make a sound as he listened. The words were almost whispered, but their conspiratorial tone reached his ears clearly. "The brakes need to fail as soon as Elliot is on the road," a woman said, her voice soft but filled with subtle venom. It was Renata, Elliot's wife. Gale frowned. He had heard her before, always elegant, always the center of attention at luxurious events. But now, there was something different in her voice, something cold and calculating. "You're playing with fire, Renata," Charles replied, a man whose harsh tone contrasted with her refined posture. "If anything goes wrong, we're both dead. Elliot isn't just anyone. He has eyes and ears everywhere." "That's exactly why we need to be careful," Renata replied impatiently. "Elliot trusts me. He'll never suspect anything. And you know as well as I do that he's been distracted lately, worried about this new business of his. This is the perfect opportunity." Gale felt a tightness in his chest. The conversation was becoming increasingly clear. They were planning to kill Elliot, her own husband. The boy swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of what he was hearing. "An accidental death," Renata continued, as if she were discussing something trivial, like a dinner menu. "No one will question it. A millionaire, businessman dies in a car accident. It happens all the time. And after that, Charles, everything will be ours, the fortune, the influence, the future." Charles snorted, but he didn't seem entirely convinced. "What if someone investigates? What if they find out the brakes were sabotaged? Who will suspect me?" Renata laughed, a cold sound that made Gale shiver. "I'm the devoted wife, remember? Everyone will think it was just a tragedy. No one will look at us." Gale's heart was pounding in his chest. He knew it was wrong, terribly wrong, sabotaging a car's brakes to murder someone, and even worse, coming from his own wife. He thought about running away, ignoring everything, and going back to the streets where his life was already hard enough. But something inside him told him he couldn't just turn his back. "This can't happen," Gale muttered so quietly that not even the sound of the rain outside could drown out his words. "I have to do something." He clenched his fists, torn between fear and determination. He knew that warning Elliot would be risky, perhaps even dangerous. But he also knew that he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he remained silent. The night seemed endless as Gail lay awake, sitting in a dark corner of the garage. The storm had weakened, but the weight of what he had heard still echoed, in his mind like distant thunder. He knew he couldn't just ignore it. Elliot's life was literally at stake. But how could a homeless, voiceless street kid confront people as powerful as Renata and Charles? I can't stand by, he thought again, his resolve growing stronger by the second. If I don't do anything, they'll kill him. And then, who knows how many other people might suffer because of this greed. The day dawned gray, with the sky still heavy with the clouds from the night before. Gail left the garage before sunrise, hiding in the shadows of the mansion's garden. He knew he had to find Elliot before he got into the car, but how? The property was huge, surrounded by high walls and guarded by security guards. Luckily, Gail was familiar with the city's alleys and shortcuts. By observing discreetly, he noticed that there was a side gate used by employees to enter and leave the house. It was a slim chance, but it was worth trying. Hours passed until finally he saw something that made his heart race. A tall, elegant man, wearing an impeccable suit, was walking towards the garage. It was Elliot. He was talking on his cell phone, seemingly distracted, but his gestures were confident, exuding authority. Gail took a deep breath and ran from his hiding place. "Mr. Elliot," he shouted, approaching quickly. His voice was thin and shaky, but full of urgency. "Please wait." Elliot turned in surprise, lowering the phone. His eyes narrowed as he saw the barefoot, ragged boy standing in front of him. "Who are you?" he asked suspiciously. "How do you know my name?" I know about the car," Gail said breathlessly. "The brakes, they're going to fail." Elliot frowned, clearly puzzled. "What are you talking about?" "Listen, sir," Gail continued hesitantly but resolutely. "I heard two people talking last night. They want to hurt you. They said they're going to sabotage your car's brakes so it looks like an accident. You can't get in that car." Elliot crossed his arms, studying the boy with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "And who are these people? How did you hear about this?" I was taking shelter in your garage during the storm," Gail admitted, lowering his head. "I didn't want to cause trouble, but I heard everything. It was Renata, your wife, and a man named Charles. They're planning to kill you, Mr. Elliot, please believe me." Elliot raised his eyebrows, surprised by the revelation. He watched Gail for a few seconds, noticing the sincerity in his frightened eyes. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something in the boy's tone of voice that seemed genuine. "Are you saying my own wife wants to kill me?" Elliot asked incredulously. Gail nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. I don't know why, but she mentioned money and business. They think no one will suspect because they'll make it look like an accident." Elliot was silent for a moment, processing the words. Then he picked up his cell phone and dialed a quick number. "Carlos, come to the garage right now. Bring your tools and check my car's brakes. Now." As they waited, Elliot looked at Gail again, this time with a softer look. "If what you're saying is true, kid, you just saved my life." Elliot remained silent as he waited for Carlos, his trusted mechanic, to arrive at the garage. His eyes flickered between the boy in front of him and the gleaming car that looked untouched, seemingly harmless. Yet something in Gail's tone, the urgency, the vulnerability mixed with courage, wouldn't let him ignore the warning. "You're right about one thing," Elliot said finally, his voice calm but thick with skepticism. "If Renata really is involved in this, I would never have guessed. She's always been so careful." He shook his head, as if trying to dispel the absurd idea of his own wife conspiring against him. "But if you're lying..." He let the sentence hang, an implicit warning. Gail swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words. He knew he was risking everything by confronting a man like Elliot. "I'm not lying, sir," he replied firmly. "I know it sounds crazy, but I heard every word. They want to kill you." A few minutes later, Carlos arrived at the garage, a burly, experienced man with rough, grease-stained hands. "What's wrong, Mr. Elliot?" he asked, visibly surprised by the unusual request. "Check my car's brakes," Elliot ordered bluntly. "I want to know if there's anything wrong with them." Carlos frowned but didn't question him. He began to inspect the vehicle meticulously, disassembling parts of the braking system. Meanwhile, the silence in the garage was palpable. Elliot watched the mechanic's every move, while Gale stood still, his fists clenched, praying that his words would be confirmed. A few tense minutes passed until Carlos let out a low whistle. "Mr. Elliot," he began, his expression grave. "Someone tampered with your brakes. The main cable was cut almost all the way. If you had gotten into the car and used the brakes, you probably would have lost control completely." Gale felt immediate relief but also a lump in his throat. He had made the right choice in coming here, but now he knew he was in the middle of something much bigger than he could have imagined. Elliot stood still for a moment, processing Carlos's words. His expression went from distrust to shock to suppressed anger. He turned slowly to Gale, his eyes fixed on the boy. "You saved my life," he said, his voice softer, but still filled with intensity. "I don't know who you are, or why you were in my garage, but what you did, not many people would have that courage. I thought it was the right thing to do." Gale replied hesitantly. "I couldn't just ignore it." Elliot studied him for a long moment, impressed by the boy's determination. Despite his frail appearance and shabby clothes, Gale exuded a strength beyond his years. There was something about him, perhaps naivety, perhaps pure conviction, that touched him deeply. "Do you have a name?" Elliot asked finally. "Gale, sir." "Well, Gale," Elliot continued, a small smile playing on his lips, "it seems we're starting an interesting partnership. Come with me. We need to talk about what you've heard and what we're going to do from here." Gale hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He had just entered a dangerous game, and there was no turning back. Elliot led Gale into the mansion, guiding him through wide, luxurious hallways that were a stark contrast to the street life the boy was accustomed to. The shock was evident in Gale's eyes, as he tried to hide his discomfort as he took in the exquisite details of the house. Sparkling crystal chandeliers, soft carpets beneath his bare feet, and artwork hanging on the walls. "You're going to stay here for now," Elliot said, his voice firm but not authoritative. "I need to better understand what you heard and how it can help us unmask whoever is behind this." Gale nodded, still a little hesitant. I just want to help, Mr. Elliot. I don't know exactly what they're going to do next, but I know that Renata is dangerous." She seemed very confident when she talked about her plan. Elliot paused for a moment, considering the boy's words. He had known Renata for years, or at least he thought he had. He had always seen her as an ambitious woman, yes, but he never would have imagined that she would be capable of something so cruel. But now she was beginning to see the pieces falling into place. His frequent absences, his discreet phone conversations, the subtle distance he had attributed solely to the stress of business. Perhaps it was more than that. They were both in the living room when Renata appeared, entering with elegant steps and a practiced smile on her face. Her eyes immediately fell on Gale, and her smile turned into an expression of absolute disdain. "Who is this child?" Renata asked, addressing Elliot with a slightly irritated tone. "What is he doing here?" "Gale is helping me with a problem," Elliot replied, choosing his words carefully. He watched Renata's reaction closely, noticing how her eyes narrowed for a brief moment before returning to normal. "He has important information." Renata laughed, a short, cold sound that echoed through the room. "Important information? From a street kid?" She looked at Gale with disdain, as if he were invisible. "Elliot, honey, do you really believe that? It sounds like someone is wasting your time." Gale felt the weight of her words, but he stood his ground, staring at her with a mixture of fear and determination. He knew Renata was trying to discredit him, but he could also tell she was nervous. There was something about her posture, the way she crossed her arms, the way she avoided looking directly at Elliot, that betrayed her uneasiness. Elliot, on the other hand, began to see clearly the coldness behind Renata's mask. He had always known she was calculating, but now, seeing how she treated Gail with such indifference, something inside him stirred. He remembered the boy's words. She mentioned money and business. Could Renata really go that far? Renata, Elliot said, his voice calm but with a hint of warning. Don't underestimate people just because they don't have the same status as us. Sometimes it's precisely these people who can show us truths we'd rather ignore. Renata blinked, surprised by Elliot's response. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes revealed a glimmer of uncertainty. Of course, dear, she said, forcing a smile. I'm just worried about you. These stories can be dangerous. I don't want you getting involved with shady people. Elliot held her gaze for a moment, studying every detail of her expression. Then, without saying anything else, he turned to Gail. Let's continue our conversation somewhere else, he said, indicating for the boy to follow him. As they left the room, Elliot felt a whirlwind of emotions. The suspicion that was beginning to grow inside him was uncomfortable, but also inevitable. He knew he needed to investigate further, and Gail would be a key player in that. Once they were alone again, Elliot looked at the boy sincerely. You did well to come to me, Gail. Now I need your help to find out everything you can about Renata and Charles. They won't get away with this. Gail was sitting in an armchair in Elliot's library, a room filled with tall bookshelves filled with leather-bound books. Despite the luxury around him, his mind was far from that impressive environment. He mentally reviewed every detail of the conversation he had overheard the night before, trying to remember something that could help Elliot unmask Renata and Charles. Mr. Elliot, Gail finally said, breaking the silence between them. I know it sounds crazy, but Renata is the mastermind behind all this. She spoke as if she were the leader, as if she were in charge. Elliot, who had been leafing through some documents on his desk, looked up at the boy. There was a seriousness in his expression that showed how much he was absorbing Gail's words. You're right, Gail, he replied, his voice firm. Renata isn't acting alone, but she's certainly at the center of it. The way she treated you in the living room, it was calculated. She wanted to discredit you before I even considered her words. Gail nodded, feeling a mix of relief and concern. She knows I know too much, the boy continued, his eyes fixed on Elliot's. If Renata finds out I told her everything, she'll blame me, and I have no doubt she'll do anything to silence me. Elliot approached, placing a hand on Gail's thin shoulder. That won't happen, he stated with a conviction that surprised even himself. You saved my life and I won't allow anything to happen to you. From now on, you're under my protection. We'll expose this betrayal together. The boy took a deep breath, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. It was strange to trust someone after so many years living on the streets, but something about Elliot made him believe that this man would keep his word. Meanwhile, Elliot was already starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. He knew Renata was ambitious, but he never imagined that she would be capable of conspiring against him without some external incentive. It was then that an old suspicion began to resurface. Octavio. Octavio had been a longtime rival, a shrewd businessman whose sole goal seemed to be to destroy Elliot both professionally and personally. They had fought fierce battles in the business world, and although Elliot always emerged victorious, he knew that Octavio would never give up. Could he be using Renata and Charles as pawns in his game? Octavio, Elliot muttered almost to himself. It makes sense. He hates to lose, and he knows that my companies are thriving more than ever. If something happened to me, he would have enough room to take over the market. Gail frowned, trying to follow the reasoning. Who is Octavio? Someone who doesn't accept defeat, Elliot replied, his tone dark. He's tried to take me down before, but never so directly. Using Renata and Charles as puppets, that's typical of him. Calculating, cold, and ruthless. Elliot walked over to one of the bookshelves, picking up a thick book that contained old business records. We need to confirm this, he said, flipping through the pages quickly. If Octavio is behind this, he's left a trail. He always does. Gail watched Elliot with admiration. Despite the dangerous situation, the man exuded a strategic calm, as if he were already thinking several steps ahead. "What can we do?" the boy asked, eager to help. "First, we need to gather evidence," Elliot explained. "We can't just accuse Renata and Octavio without concrete evidence. That would be a dangerous game. You can help us with that, Gail. You have courage, intelligence, and most importantly, a unique insight into these people. Together, we will expose this conspiracy." The two exchanged a determined look, united by a common purpose. For Gail, this was an opportunity to change not only Elliot's fate but his own as well. For Elliot, it was a chance to face his enemies and, who knows, find a new purpose alongside someone he was beginning to see as more than just an ally. "Let's get started," Elliot said, with a slight but determined smile. "Our first step is to find out where Renata and Charles will meet Octavio again." In the following days, Gail became a silent shadow behind the scenes of the conspiracy. Elliot had drawn up a meticulous plan. While he investigated Octavio's movements and sought documentary evidence that would link his rival to the sabotage, Gail would use his ability to go unnoticed to infiltrate secret meetings between Renata and Charles. The boy knew it was risky, but he also understood the urgency of the situation. Every minute counted. One night, Gail followed Renata to a discreet cafe in the IE city center, a dimly lit place frequented by few. She found Charles at a table hidden in the far corner of the room. The boy, hidden behind a nearby column, strained his ears to catch every word of the conversation. "Elliot is suspicious," Renata said, her tone barely concealed. "He brought that kid into the house. I don't know what he knows, but it's not good for us." Charles frowned, visibly nervous. "Do you think he found out something about the breaks? If so, we're screwed." "We can't take that risk," Renata replied, lowering her voice even further, although her eyes shone with cold determination. "We need to act fast. Let's change the plan. Tomorrow night, Elliot will attend that meeting at the company headquarters. It's the perfect opportunity." Gail felt a shiver run down his spine at that. They were planning something even bigger, something that could put Elliot in mortal danger again. He needed to warn him immediately. Back at the mansion, Gail found Elliot in his office, poring over documents under the soft light of a lamp. When he saw the boy rush in, he knew something was wrong. "Gail?" Elliot asked, looking up. "What happened?" "Renata and Charles are planning another attack," Gail said breathlessly. "They're going to try to kill him tomorrow night during the meeting at the company headquarters. They said it's the perfect opportunity." Elliot stood still for a moment, absorbing the words. His expression hardened, and he clenched his fists on the table. "So they really aren't going to give up," he muttered, more to himself than to Gail. "Well, that means we need to be faster and smarter." Elliot began to pace thoughtfully. "This meeting will be in a tall building with few accessible exits. If they're planning something there, they must be confident that I won't be able to escape." He stopped and looked at Gail. "But we have one advantage. We know what they're up to, and they don't know that we know." "What are we going to do?" Gail asked anxiously. "We're going to use this against them," Elliot replied, a sly smile playing on his lips. "First, I need you to stay undercover. Find out everything you can about how they plan to carry out the attack. In the meantime, I'll prepare a counterattack. I'll make sure this meeting is the last time they have a chance to threaten me." Elliot pulled out an old cell phone and handed it to Gail. "Use this to send me messages. It's secure and untraceable. If you find out anything, let me know immediately." Gail nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility grow inside him. He knew he was walking a fine line between safety and danger, but he also knew that this was his chance to do something big, something that mattered. The next morning, Gail followed Renata again. This time she met with a man he recognized immediately, Octavio. The businessman exuded authority and ruthlessness with a cold smile ever present on his face. They discussed details about the operation. "Tomorrow night, Elliot will be dead," Octavio said, with eerie calm. "I've already prepared everything. During the meeting, there will be a blackout in the building. My men will be there to make sure he doesn't leave alive." Gale felt his heart race. He needed to inform Elliot as soon as possible. As soon as he had the chance, he sent a coded message. On his cell phone, Octavio is involved. Planned blackout. Armed men. Time is short. Elliot read the message minutes later and let out a low, almost dark laugh. So that's how they want to play it, huh? He muttered. Very well. Let's turn this trap of theirs against them. With a plan already taking shape in his mind, Elliot began to gather discreet allies and take measures to ensure that the meeting did not end as Renata and Octavio expected. Gale, for his part, continued his mission, collecting evidence and monitoring the conspirators. Together, they were about to turn the tables, but they knew that the final confrontation would be explosive. Elliot sat in his private conference room, the soft lights of the room reflecting off his thoughtful face. Before him was a detailed blueprint of the corporate headquarters where the fateful meeting would take place. He traced lines on the paper with a marker, planning each step with surgical precision. Gael, he said finally, turning to the boy waiting patiently by the table, we're going to give them exactly what they're expecting. The boy frowned in confusion. What do you mean? We're going to fake my death, Elliot replied, a sly glint in his eyes. They're confident they're going to eliminate me tomorrow night, so we're going to use that conviction against them. When they think they've won, that's exactly the moment we catch them off guard. Gale's eyes widened, surprised by the boldness of the plan. But how are we going to do that? What if something goes wrong? Elliot smiled, but it was a smile filled with determination and strategic coldness. I've thought of everything. I'm going to use trusted contacts to spread the fake news. My most loyal security guards will help stage the accident, and you, Gale, will be essential in this. I need you to continue monitoring Renata and Charles, capturing their reactions when they think they've triumphed. The following night, everything was ready. The meeting at the corporate headquarters began on time, with Elliot leading the discussions while his lawyers and executives presented financial reports. However, minutes after they began, the lights in the building abruptly went out, plunging the room into total darkness. Octavio's plan was in action. Outside, armed men hired by Octavio silently stormed the building, following their instructions, to neutralize any resistance and ensure that Elliot did not leave alive. However, what they found was a carefully staged scene. In the main office, there was an overturned chair, papers scattered across the floor and traces of a struggle. A wounded security guard lay in the corner of the room, actually an actor hired by Elliot, and a small pool of fake blood completed the illusion. They thought they had it, Gale muttered, watching from afar through a hidden camera installed in the hallway. He sent a quick message to Elliot. Plot in motion. Accomplices have fallen into the trap. Elliot, hiding in a safe place with his closest allies, smiled upon receiving confirmation. Perfect, he said. Now it's time to let them celebrate their temporary victory. A few hours later, the news spread like wildfire. Local newspapers and news networks announced Elliot's supposed death during a violent robbery at his corporate headquarters. Sensationalist reports described the event as a tragic accident, without directly linking him to the conspirators. Inside the mansion, Renata received the news with a barely concealed smile. She walked over to Charles, who was sitting on the couch in the living room, and lifted a glass of champagne. Finally, she said with a low, satisfied laugh. It's done. Elliot is dead, and now everything will be ours. Charles nodded, raising his own glass. You were brilliant, Renata. Without you, this would never have happened. The two toasted, fully believing they had won, but what they didn't notice was the discreet presence of Gale, strategically positioned behind a nearby curtain, recording the entire conversation on a device provided by Elliot. The boy immediately sent the audio to Elliot, who listened attentively. Great work, Gale, Elliot said into the phone, his voice low but firm. These recordings will be crucial to exposing Renata and Charles. Now there's only one last step: catching Octavio. With the evidence in hand and the conspirators distracted by the fake victory, Elliot knew the decisive moment was near. It was time to unmask everyone involved and turn his fake death into a resounding victory. In the days following Elliot's fake death, Gail and the businessman worked in silence, hidden in a secure apartment in the city center. The windows were covered by heavy curtains, and the constant sound of keyboards being pressed filled the room. While Elliot coordinated his most trusted contacts to track Octavio's movements, Gail remained undercover, gathering crucial information about the conspirators. "Octavio is starting to get suspicious," Elliot said one night as he studied a map with notes on his rival's frequent hangouts. "He knows something's not right, but he doesn't have enough evidence to prove I'm alive yet." Gail nodded, focused on reviewing the recordings he had collected over the past few days. He had recorded discreet conversations between Renata and Charles, as well as observing secret meetings organized by Octavio. "They're nervous," the boy commented. "Renata is putting pressure on Charles to make sure everything is clean. I think she's worried something will go wrong." Elliot smiled slightly, impressed by Gail's insight. "You're doing a great job, but we have to be careful. If Octavio finds out we're alive, he'll completely change the game." However, not everything went according to plan. During a particularly risky mission, Gail was nearly discovered. He had followed Renata to a cafe where she was meeting Octavio. Hiding behind a nearby newspaper stand, the boy was trying to catch every word of the conversation when suddenly Renata looked directly at him. "Who's that boy over there?" she asked, pointing in Gail's direction. Her narrowed eyes showed a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Gail felt his heart race. He quickly bent down, pretending to search for something on the floor, and muttered, "It must be just some kid." Octavio frowned, clearly displeased. "We can't take any chances. Make sure no one is watching us and send someone to investigate this boy." As soon as Renata looked away, Gail ran off, his legs shaking with fear. He knew he had narrowly escaped, but he also realized that his presence was beginning to arouse suspicion. Later, back at the safe apartment, Gail reported the incident to Elliot. The businessman listened intently, his face serious as he processed the information. "You were very brave, Gail," Elliot said finally, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "But this proves that they are becoming more cautious. We need to act quickly before they discover our plan. I almost messed up," Gail admitted, his voice shaking. "What if they recognize me? What if they catch me?" Elliot looked directly into the boy's eyes, his expression softening. "You didn't mess up at all. You saved my life. You're helping me unmask dangerous people, and you're facing fears that most adults wouldn't have the courage to face. You're stronger than you think, Gail." Elliot's words touched the boy deeply. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, of purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Elliot," he replied, his voice gaining strength. "I'll keep going. I won't give up now." Elliot smiled proudly. "That's the attitude we need. Now, let's use their closeness to you to our advantage. Let's expose Octavio and his accomplices once and for all." The two exchanged a determined look, united by a partnership that went beyond simple convenience. Gail felt that for the first time in his life, he was doing something important, something that could change not only his destiny, but that of others as well. And Elliot, in turn, saw in the boy not only an ally, but someone he could completely trust. "We're close," Elliot said, turning his attention to the documents spread out on the table. "Very close." The night was cold and silent as Elliot and Gail prepared for the decisive moment. Using information gathered by Gail during his espionage missions, they discovered that Octavio had called a secret meeting in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was there that the conspirators planned to celebrate their victory and share the profits of their betrayal. "This is our chance," Elliot said, adjusting the hidden microphone on his lapel. He wore simple clothes, disguising himself so as not to attract attention. "We're going to go in, get the final evidence, and hand it over to the police." Gail nodded, though his eyes revealed a mix of fear and determination. He carried a small device that would record the entire conversation inside the warehouse. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It won't," Elliot replied firmly. "We're prepared. And remember, you've already done more than any adult would in this situation. Trust yourself. The two approached the warehouse cautiously, using the shadows as cover. The entrance was guarded by Octavio's hired security, but Elliot had planned everything in advance. One of his contacts embedded in the security team would ensure they could enter undetected. Inside the warehouse, Renata, Charles, and Octavio sat around a makeshift table, counting stacks of cash and discussing their next steps now that they believed Elliot was out of the picture. With Elliot dead, the coast is clear, Octavio said, his triumphant tone echoing through the empty space. His companies will be mine, and you will have your share, as agreed. Renata smiled, clearly satisfied. We will finally reap the rewards of all this work. Gail and Elliot exchanged a meaningful look. It was time to act. Elliot advanced first, bursting into the warehouse with a gun pointed at Octavio. It seems you celebrated too soon, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. The conspirators froze, their faces turning pale at the sight of Elliot alive. Renata was the first to react, trying to regain her composure. That's impossible. You should be dead. I'm good at surviving, Elliot retorted with a wry smile, and thanks to Gail here, he pointed to the boy who had just appeared behind him. I have all the evidence I need to expose them. Gail held up the recording device, displaying it as indisputable proof. Everything they said was recorded, the boy stated, his voice steady despite his nervousness. Octavio stood up abruptly, furious. Do you think you're going to get out of here alive? But before he could make a move, sirens wailed outside. The police, alerted by Elliot with the evidence they had gathered, surrounded the warehouse within minutes. The officers stormed the premises, handcuffing Octavio, Renata, and Charles while formally charging them with conspiracy, sabotage, and attempted murder. Hours later, as he watched the conspirators being taken away in police cars, Elliot allowed himself a moment of reflection. He was exhausted but also relieved. Finally, the threat had been neutralized. Gail, he called, turning to the boy who remained beside him. You made all this happen. Without you, I wouldn't have made it. The boy smiled shyly, but there was pride in his eyes. I only did what I thought was right, Mr. Elliot. Elliot shook his head, moved. You did so much more than that. You showed me that there are still people in the world who fight for good, even when all seems lost. And I want you to know that I won't let you go. Gail frowned in confusion. What do you mean? I want you to stay with me, Elliot explained, his voice thick with sincerity. You have a bright future ahead of you, and I want to help you build it. We'll rebuild my life together, and who knows, maybe you'll find your true purpose along the way. The words touched Gail deeply. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the possibility of a new beginning. I would like that, the boy replied, his voice choked with emotion. Elliot placed a hand on Gail's shoulder, sealing a silent promise. Together they would begin a new phase, one of healing, growth, and redemption. The following months brought a profound transformation in Gail's life. Under Elliot's tutelage, he began attending one of New York's most prestigious schools. At first, the boy felt out of place among the privileged students, who came from wealthy families and seemed to live in a completely different world from his own. However, his determination and intelligence soon began to shine through. He's amazing, a teacher commented during a meeting with Elliot. Gail is years ahead of the other students in math and science. He has an insatiable curiosity and an amazing ability to learn. Elliot beamed with pride. He's always been like this. From the day I met him, I knew he had something special. Gail not only adapted to his new environment, but he began to excel academically. His teachers praised his dedication and ability to solve complex problems, while his peers began to admire his humility and willingness to help those in need. Despite the initial difficulties, the boy proved that it was possible to overcome any obstacle with effort and support. Meanwhile, Elliot reflected on everything that had happened. Renata's betrayal and Octavio's conspiracy left deep scars on him, but they also inspired him to seek a greater purpose. Watching Gail's transformation from a street kid with no prospects to a promising young man full of potential He realized that he could do more for the world. "Let's create something that helps kids like you," Elliot said one night as he and Gail talked in the mansion's library. "Something that gives them the chance to change their lives like you had." Gail looked at him intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "A project called Futuro Vivo," Elliot replied, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We'll identify vulnerable kids on the streets, provide them with education, food, and psychological support. I want them to have the same opportunities you had, and I want you to be a part of it, not just as a beneficiary but as a living example of what is possible." Gail's heart swelled with excitement. He knew exactly the impact an initiative like this could have. How many children like him were out there struggling to survive with no one to believe in them? I would love to help," the boy said, his voice breaking. "I want to show other kids that they can be more than their circumstances." The Futuro Vivo project was officially launched a few months later. With funding from Elliot's companies and partnerships with social organizations, the program quickly gained notoriety. Shelters opened in various parts of the city, offering shelter, education, and extracurricular activities to vulnerable children. Gail became the face of the project, sharing his story at events and in interviews. He spoke passionately about the importance of believing in one's own potential, even when the world seemed indifferent. "I was a street kid," he said at a charity event to an emotional audience. "But someone believed in me. Someone gave me a chance. And now I want all children to know that they deserve that chance too." Gail's words touched hearts and inspired many. The project grew quickly, receiving donations and volunteers from all over the country. Elliot watched with pride, knowing that he had found a new purpose in his life. As the years passed, the bond between Gail and Elliot grew stronger. The once street kid was now preparing to enter college, determined to use his education to continue helping others. And Elliot, in turn, found in Gail's mentorship a new reason to keep going. "You know, Gail," Elliot said one afternoon as they walked through the mansion's gardens, "you didn't just change my life. You showed me that there is still hope in the world." Gail smiled, looking toward the horizon. "And you showed me that I can be more than I ever imagined." Together they had built something extraordinary, a bridge between two worlds, combining strength, courage, and compassion to transform lives. The years passed, and Gail's transformation was more than anyone could have anticipated. From a street kid struggling to survive, he had become an inspiring young leader, recognized for his dedication to the Futuro Vivo project. Now in his 20s, Gail led a network of educational centers that reached thousands of vulnerable children. He had graduated with honors in business administration and social innovation, using his knowledge to expand the project's reach and ensure that every child was given the tools they needed to build a better future. Elliot watched it all with a quiet but profound pride. He saw in Gail not just a protege but someone who carried within himself the values and vision he had always wanted to impart. The boy who had once entered his life as a barefoot, scared stranger was now a confident man, capable of leading and inspiring multitudes. "You know," Elliot said one evening, as the two of them sat on the porch of the mansion watching the sunset, "I've never had children, but if I did, I'd want them to be like you." Gail smiled, surprised by the depth of his words. I can't even begin to put into words what you did for me. You didn't just save me, you showed me that I could do something important." Elliot shook his head, his eyes reflecting wisdom and gratitude. "I didn't do this, Gail. It was you. You chose to fight. You chose to believe. You chose to change. I just gave you the initial push." But they both knew that their connection went beyond simple gratitude. They had become more than mentor and mentee. They were a makeshift family, bonded by experiences that shaped their lives forever. Over time, Elliot began to think about the future. He was getting older, and his energy was no longer what it once was. He knew he needed to ensure that the legacy of Futuro Vivo would continue strong, even when he was no longer there to lead it. And there was no one better suited to take on that responsibility than Gail. I want you to be my successor, Elliot said one day during a strategic meeting about the project's future. His voice was firm but thick with emotion. You understand this initiative better than anyone. You've lived what these children are living. You're the right person to continue it. Gail was silent for a moment, processing the words. He knew Elliot was right, but he also felt the weight of the responsibility. I accept, he finally replied, his voice full of determination. But I'm not going to do this alone. I'm going to need you by my side, at least for a little while longer. Elliot smiled, touched by the answer. You can count on me, Gail, always. The circle was complete. Renata's betrayal and Octavio's conspiracy had been the starting point for a journey of redemption and purpose. Elliot found in Gail not only an ally, but an heir to his dreams and ideals. And Gail, in turn, found in Elliot the father he never had, someone who believed in him when the world ignored him. Years later, in an emotional ceremony, Gail was officially named Executive Director of Futuro Vivo, while Elliot took on an advisory role, dedicating himself to mentoring the next generation of leaders. Together, they continued to change lives, proving that even in the most unlikely circumstances, it is possible to find hope, purpose, and a new chance to start over. In the end, Gail and Elliot's story was not just about overcoming. It was about how two people coming from such different worlds could come together to create something greater than themselves, a legacy of love, courage, and transformation. If you were inspired by this story of overcoming and transformation, leave your like so that more people can hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more exciting stories like this one. Share this video and tell us in the comments which part impacted you the most. Together, we can spread the word about the importance of believing in each person's potential and building a better future for everyone.